All right, we're recently off of the Donald Trump Kamala Harris debate. Some are saying that Donald Trump swept her, others are saying she dominated the night. Almost everyone is saying ABC News is the real loser. We're going to go through this and many other big stories. To help me do that, I have journalist Emma Jo Morris with me. Emma, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, just some background. Emma is a writer, author. She's also a journalist for Breitbart News out of New York City. You watch the debates, I'm sure. Every day there's like a million news stories coming at us, whether it's war or the economy or scandals with the Biden family or Kamala Harris, some gaffe from her. But during the debate, Kamala Harris was asked how she will help make life more affordable for Americans. She then went off on this rant about being middle class and understanding the middle class and that she's the only one on the stage that's middle class. She then pointed out that Donald Trump is not middle class and how she has a plan, but then she gave zero details, zero policies, zero hope on how to make life more affordable. What are your thoughts on this? And wasn't she raised in Canada? So how can she understand middle class America?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think people in the middle class really care if anyone else is from the middle class. They care, do you have concrete solutions to the problems I have, of which there are many in this administration. Obviously, first and foremost, middle class families need food and gas. So if they're having challenges affording food and gas, that's all they care about. But Kamala Harris has created this contrived persona of herself as this, middle class girl who, knows all about the struggle of making your way in this country. And it just couldn't be further from the truth. It's absolutely absurd. So, just to say, I don't think that there's anything wrong with being raised in Canada or not being middle class or whatever. I think that if you're a thoughtful person, you can think about ways to solve problems that are pretty universal and have pretty concrete solutions, or at least a few concrete solutions that you can propose. I don't think that you need to have lived a hard life in order to think about that. But Kamala Harris not only grew up in Canada, but grew up in the nicest neighborhood in Canada, the nicest neighborhood like by metrics, not just like tree line blocks. Like this is the richest neighborhood in the entire country. She lived on a street where homes range at the low end between $1 to $2 million American dollars. So to say that she's middle class and that's some sort of stand-in for policy is preposterous. I mean, it would be preposterous even if it was true, but it's a straight out, flat out lie.
Yeah, from what I could see, it's a very posh area. I think many middle class Americans would say, "Wow, I would trade places to live in that bougie neighborhood." Do you think the economic issues are the number one thing driving how people will vote, or do you think that a lot of people are just kind of stuck in, I'm a Democrat, I've always been a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I've always been a Republican? Or do you see the economy, as they always say, like, it's the economy, dummy? Do you think that really plays a large role in this particular election?
Well, I think that the ideological lines are kind of moving, and the lines of what's labeled a Republican versus a Democrat are moving. And we can see that by the way RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, two dyed-in-the-wool liberals, are coming over to Trump's camp and endorsing him and trying to help him win this election. But that aside, like ideology aside, I do think that the economy is going to be a major issue this election, and a deciding issue in this election, and a motivating issue, because it's not like we're tinkering at the edges here. Inflation is maybe the worst it's ever been. There are some products that are up 20, 30, 40, 50%. And these are not, luxury products. These are basic products. These are food. Energy is scarce. Kamala Harris attributes that to the greed of grocery stores and has proposed price controls to prevent greed by grocery stores, whose margins, by the way, are probably 2%, 3%. I think Walmart's margins are 3.5%. To say greed is just indication that she has absolutely no earthly idea what is going on here. She has no idea what's going on, and more importantly, she has no idea about how to solve it. Then you have Trump coming in on the other side, and say what you want, Democrat or Republican. He's vowed just this alone would plummet costs, which is to produce more energy. Part of the reason why inflation is so high is because energy is scarcer and more expensive. It takes energy to produce anything you need, whether it be anything sitting in front of you on your desk or your food or anything. It all requires, obviously, to be produced and transported. So he's talking about just that alone, that policy alone, and forget about his fiscal policy and his economic policy and his tax rates, which are all obviously more helpful. But that indicates a much deeper understanding of the problems and solutions that we could use to fix them. So Democrat or Republican, it feels trivial in this election when the stakes are just so high. And I don't mean, the future of the country or whatever. I'm talking about today. Today, people need air.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Just going back to what you said about ideological lines are shifting. In my lifetime, I never thought I would see a Kennedy join forces with a Republican and a Dick Cheney join forces with a Democrat. I mean, like these ideological shifts. And yet, if we just take, what each of those represent, what are your thoughts on, like, when you think of RFK, what do you think of? When you think of Dick Cheney, what do you think of? And that kind of tells you the direction of where the parties are going.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on each of those gentlemen?
Well, let me speak. Well, okay, I could tell you what I think of each of them, and then that would segue into what I think is going on here. I think that RFK, regardless of whether you agree with him about guns, or you agree with him about vaccines, or whatever, he's talked about a lot of interesting issues, and he has a lot of interesting opinions, some of which I think are brilliant and some of which I think are totally misguided. It doesn't matter, because what he's doing in its essence is he's challenging the grip and the accepted narrative that all of these special interests have spent the last 20 years and 30 years and 40 years inculcating Americans with. What comes to mind especially is how he talks about big pharma. And you could say what you want about vaccines or how they affect people. I happen to really honestly not see what he's saying about the effects of vaccines. But the challenge of the vaccine schedule, that is such a kind of like sacred narrative in our culture that no, you have to give your children these vaccines and we don't even question it. And all he's saying is on this issue is, do we need all of these vaccines? And also, what's in our food? It's why would that be an issue to talk about? But it's challenging two of maybe the biggest special interest groups in Washington, or among the top 5 special interest groups in Washington. And therefore, he is persona non grata. He has to be completely discredited. He has to be completely attacked and destroyed. And then you have Dick Cheney, on the other hand, who is a quote unquote Republican and who maybe I do agree with on tax policy or whatever. But Dick Cheney advocates for any and every single, and obviously we know the one that we're all thinking of, the war machine, any and every single special interest group in DC. And that said, it's like these two people, these two men, I'm so glad that you actually now, juxtapose them, is these two men represent, I think, the new ideological divide, which is establishment versus anti-establishment. Do you toe the line of the people who make the sun rise in Washington, or do you challenge those groups and those people and that money? And are you willing to actually upend the status quo in that city, in our capital?
Yeah. For me, I see RFK Jr. as fighting for freedom of speech. I feel like Republicans now want to fight for freedom of speech. I think questioning corporate capture, what's in our food,
yes,
what's in these vaccines, does big pharma have way more influence than any of us realized? Do we trust a vaccine schedule because it's been forced upon us and they've used propaganda and manipulation in order to get us to accept it? Things like that. Dick Cheney, I see as the military industrial complex, taking us into a $9 trillion Middle East war based off lies in order to prop up the very war machines that made his family rich. So
Yes.
it's interesting to see Republicans shift away from war and become more liberal, and Democrats give up their liberties in order to be more aligned with corporate America. I kind of find it a fascinating juxtaposition.
Well, it's funny because it's become so cultural and not ideological in a way, politics. You know, it's become really just two economic interests, two competing economic interests. And on the one hand, you have the interests of working people, and on the other hand, you have the interests of the established kind of elite population, whether it be Wall Street, whether it be lobbyists, whether it be big business, you know, in all the variety of industries that influence Washington, but where there's money trading hands and where they're making the most money in our society. And it's a fight over how society is arranged and who it's going to benefit out of those two camps. Democrat and Republican now just feel like meaningless terms.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, what were your initial thoughts after the debate was over? My first thought was it felt like Trump was actually debating the ABC moderators more than Kamala Harris. She was able to sit back fairly quiet and smile and smirk and do little laughs and, you know, roll her eyes towards Donald Trump, but I didn't feel like she really added a lot of substance. And yet they did these word cloud analysis of what people were saying online. And it came up that people were annoyed with Donald Trump, but hopeful about Kamala Harris. But when it came to policies, it was the border and making life more affordable for Trump. And under Harris, it was abortion. And so it's like, it's this economy, making America more affordable versus access to abortion seems to be two of the big things. But what were your thoughts on the ABC debate?
Yes, well, that's totally right. I totally agree with you. But my thoughts are, yeah, I mean, obviously, well, I have mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, the moderators were absolutely despicable. They were ridiculous, actually. Like, there wasn't even, like, usually they try to have this kind of guise of objectivity, and it's obviously just that. It's not genuine. They are not objective, but they at least pretend. You know, like at the CNN debate, they won't really go off they didn't go off the reservation. But these people were like just unhinged. The way they were acting as debate partners of Kamala Harris, and they weren't even pretending to be neutral. It was bizarre to watch, and the debate was so disorganized, and the questions were so juvenile, and the topics of conversation, it was amateur hour, and it was because they were all like January 6th, the 2020 election. You know, they were trying to do only questions that would flatter Kamala Harris in a way that made the whole exercise just a waste of time, in my opinion, or at least a lot of it. There was one question on the economy, 0 questions on education. The border only really came up because Trump brought it up. This was just, I can't imagine how every editor that prepared these journalists for this wasn't fired. And you know that none of them were, but if we had a real industry in journalism, this would be a scandal. But that said, Trump ought to have known that's how it would be. He has to know that that's how it's going to be. I mean, it's like he wasn't in a coma over the last decade while he's been in politics and hasn't realized that these people have it out for him. So I felt like, yes, it was completely rigged. It was completely unfair. The dynamics were totally lopsided. But then at the same time, it felt like he kind of walked into a few traps that he could have known better than to have done that. You know, for instance, she made some remark about his crowd sizes, and then he spent some time talking about his crowd sizes in his rallies. You know, another instance of that was when she talked about his inheritance. That's not relevant. You know, why wouldn't you say, like, anybody is free to look at my company. I built an amazing company. That's the reason why I want to be president, because I come from a perspective that understands how to manage large corporations and how to build profit and then move on. You know, pivot to whatever you want to talk about. You want to talk, what are your strong issues? You know, immigration, the economy, foreign policy. Like, she did that. I mean, she didn't answer a single question, actually. Every single question that was posed to her was pivoted away from, and then she would just kind of give this whatever answer of platitudes, but not really addressing what she was asked. Why couldn't Trump have done that? He actually did that very effectively in the first debate with Joe Biden. He took control of the narrative in that debate. And in this one, that muscle wasn't there this time. I didn't see that. I didn't see him really taking the framing. He felt like he was on his back foot most of the night.
Yeah, no, I agree. It did feel like he was on defense more than offense.
Yeah.
You know, they kind of caught him off guard with some of that. But if I was to boil the debate down, it felt like it was, you know, Mr. Trump, why are you so bad?
Yeah.
Kamala Harris, why is he so bad?
Yeah.
The whole thing was built around Donald Trump being bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you could feel it. I think, I don't know that was lost on the American people. I do think, you know, Democrats are going to dig in and say Kamala won. Republicans are going to dig in and say, you know, Trump won. At the end of the day, did he sway, or did she sway any of the independents? Now, according to Reuters, 6 out of 10 said that they actually shifted more towards Donald Trump because her answers lacked substance.
Yeah.
And they are worried about the economy.
Yeah, right. And the thing for her that's kind of unfortunate for her, although she's fully responsible for it, is she has not, I mean, she released a sort of a policy platform like the day of the debate, but even that, it was very scant. It was like, you know, it was like, as Trump said, it was like 4 lines, and it was like run, spot, run. It's true that there was no detail. There was no specificity. She's done one interview, and in that interview too, it's like she can't even answer a straight question like, what would you do on day one? Very simple. You know, you only have a couple hours that day. What's the first thing that you're doing in your executive capacity? She can't answer that question. Okay. She can't answer the most basic. She doesn't give any really substantive policies or conversations. The only thing really that she's proposed is giving everybody $25,000 to buy a house and controlling the price of food. And those are obviously totally insane. So people don't feel like they know her. So this was the opportunity that she had to have taken to really explain in plain English very clearly what exactly her policies are. And she did not do that. She didn't say much of anything. If you've noticed, if you're online at all, there is no clips really that the Democrats are circulating of her. All they're doing is making little memes with her facial expressions. But that's not actually telling people how she's going to get their prices down, you know, how she's going to actually maybe sort of venture to control immigration at all. There's nothing pertaining to the 2 biggest issues that Americans rank as most important to them. So I don't see how people who were confused before are less confused now and therefore changing their opinion. There was nothing given to them to do that.
Yeah. Let me run a clip from one of your competitors. This is Joy Reid over on MSNBC, just saying the most joyous, wonderful things about Republicans with her show guests. Let me just show that really quickly.
I mean, everything he does is despicable.
The reason why it doesn't end his career is because his supporters are just as despicable. All right. Like Trump's whole thing, he's a narcissist, right? And so his whole thing is to have a complete lack of compassion and empathy for everybody else. It's all about him. That's why he lies about 9/11. It's all about him, me. He's probably the least compassionate president we've had in 200 years since Andrew Jackson. And it works for him because his supporters are just as ungenerous and have just as little compassion and empathy for others.
So going off on this rant that President Trump is despicable. Therefore, all Republicans, anyone interested in Trump, any independents that cross the line, they're all despicable. They're all lacking charity. They're all just horrible, horrible human beings. What are your thoughts on this clip with Joy Reid and her guest?
They seem nice. I mean, doesn't that just make you want to vote for Democrats? Doesn't that make you just say to yourself, you know what, maybe I do need to look in the mirror. Maybe I do need to change my ideas about things. I mean, that is the most hostile, vitriolic, and venomous segment I've ever seen. But that's Joy Reid. You know, she seems to have some sort of serious anger toward her compatriots that I think is really sad, and I pray for her. But in any case, yeah, I mean, MSNBC is kind of where you go to get the conversation that people who are in official politics could never say out loud, or it would cost them their career. But I can't imagine that this isn't normal conversation in tons of bars and restaurants and clubs in Washington, D.C., and New York City. They really just don't understand the, I think, very reasonable grievances of huge swaths of this country, and they don't care to. They would rather sneer at them from a studio at a glass desk in Rockefeller Center. And but those are not serious people. I mean, somebody like Elon Musk, I think that was, and Joy Reid. I mean, these are carnival barkers on the periphery. But it just goes to show, you know, I think, like, a glimpse into the true sentiment of a lot of the people who actually make decisions on our behalf, which is absolutely terrifying. But we knew that. We know that they have such disdain. Why do we know that? Because look at the state of our country. Look at the border. And that's not, and I'm not talking about necessarily even just you know, low skilled labor coming in, although that is a form of carnage in and of itself, economic carnage. But the threats that are walking in through that southern border, the drugs that are ravaging our towns and killing our young people. You know, our birth rate has gone, our life expectancy has gone down. In a first world country, the most advanced country in the world, the richest country in the world, our life expectancy has gone down. Why? Because of overdoses. There is a Holocaust going on in this country, and nobody will address it. Nobody will talk about it. I can't see how, while that's going on, a population that you love, you don't address that. And not only do you not address that, but you're busy causing wars and engaging in wars in faraway land where we have no discernible interest. You know, you're making trade deals with countries that are further exporting our economy over to these other places. It's like every single decision you could go through, economic policy, immigration policy, energy policy, any of it, foreign policy, any of it is all literally antithetical to taking care of the people of whom you represent. So if that's supposed to be surprising to me, it's like, well, yeah, of course they feel that way. Look around.
Yeah. You could just feel this vitriol towards Republicans, towards white people. I've seen these two many times, you know.
They say Republicans, it's working class people.
Yeah. But even, you know, these two scream racism all the time, and yet you can just feel how much they hate white people as they talk, which is just sad to me. But you know, let them live with their own life. So, okay. JD Vance, I believe, has been an incredible asset for Donald Trump. He's great at articulating policy, a vision for the future. He was recently a guest on the Shawn Ryan show. He said on there that Trump and Elon Musk will clean up the wasteful spending in Washington, D.C. He then said, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe up to $1 trillion in wasted money that needs to be returned to the American people. What are your thoughts on JD Vance, Trump, Elon Musk attempting to clean up this disgusting, bloated, wasteful spending of our hard-earned tax money? Your thoughts on that, Emma?
Oh God, it's about time. Oh my God, it is so overdue. No, but you know, like, like Rand Paul actually does this every year around Christmas time, where he goes through the budget and releases all of the frivolous like spending items that we have in there, and it's beyond parody. And this is our money. I mean, I don't know about you, but my taxes hurt. I know I'm in New York and everything, but they're taking a lot of money that I need. And to think that, I actually don't really, in theory, have any problem with taxes. I do think that there's certain things that are worth giving my money to the government for to accomplish, like, having public schools and having paved roads and, even taking care of the needy. I mean, I don't really think that that's the role of government, but if that's what they're doing, like, I'm not going to be brokenhearted necessarily about giving them money to do that. But when you see what they're spending, it is such, again, it's like this more kicking dirt in your face. It is such an insult. And it's about time. I mean, the amount of bloat in the government is so absurd that it's got to be addressed. And the reason why it's especially important to address it now is because I don't know if you've seen our national debt, but we're never, ever, ever getting out of that. We're never getting out of that. I mean, it's going to be our great grandkids who maybe see a country that is kind of breathing again economically. We don't even know a time, I don't think, that it's that like we haven't had this burden, so we can't imagine how it feels to not be so bogged down by it. But in any event, that's a good place to start, is looking through our books and saying, like, okay, we're wasting trillions, and it is absolutely in the trillions of dollars on frivolous items. And we need to be more responsible or our country will explode. Actually, the leader of Singapore, Singapore is a very interesting place because it went from being a third world country to a first world country in one generation. It's absolutely fascinating to observe. And it required, listen, it's not a free country. It required a very disciplined and very harsh leadership. But they have certain things about their government that I find really interesting. And it was obviously led by a genius, an obvious genius. And his name is Lee Kuan Yew. And I really, really highly recommend that the audience go check out his work and his interviews. And one of the things that he said in the 90s, observing America, this is the leader who brought Singapore from the third world to the first world in like one administration. And he said, America's debt is a ticking time bomb on it that it doesn't pay attention to. And he was talking about inflation, and he was talking about the price of goods versus the price of the dollar. And he was saying that America's downfall will be its national debt. It's not anything about its politics or its policies per se. It's the spending, the recklessness of the spending that can destroy a country. And that's what we're witnessing. I mean, the value of our dollar is not good. And we can see that by how much buying power we have with it.
Yeah, no, I point this out regularly to my audience. I think government is probably the biggest problem when it comes to our country being in as much debt as it is. None of these, like just look right now, just within the last 24 hours, you have Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, pulling the continuing resolution because he's like, I don't think this is going to get passed, and maybe we need to separate the SAVE Act, which would make it so only U.S. citizens can vote in elections. Like that's one of my disappointments with Republicans, is like they just have no spine. Like Democrats will push the envelope, but they stick together and they have a spine, even though I don't agree with what they're pushing the envelope on most of the time.
You have to commend their ability to do it.
Yeah, their unity in doing things that I don't care about is at least commendable. But this out of control spending, it's gonna bury us. Like you talk about weapons of mass destruction. This is weapons of math destruction. Like you run the math, and we're dead in the water, right? Like. We're basically using the U.S. military to get people to use the U.S. dollar so that life in America doesn't collapse. That can only go on for so long. So I'm gonna look up a little bit more about Singapore. Yeah. Yeah.
Singapore, very fascinating case. Another thing there that is really interesting to me that I've thought a lot about and wondered about how that would work here is they have the way that they prevent corruption is they pay their public servants and their representatives a lot of money, like millions of dollars a year. And the reason they do that is because they want to remove the incentive of accepting money that's untoward and accepting gifts that are untoward. And they basically say, listen, you're managing a country. That's a big job. We want you to be compensated appropriately for a big job. And we don't want you to be looking for money elsewhere. And that is something that has worked for them. I don't know how it would translate here. Obviously, different countries have different cultures and different circumstances. But there's so many things. This was a great thinker, and his commentary on America, there's a whole book about his commentary just on America. It's absolutely fascinating. And they have ways about thinking about things, social integration, cultural integration, clean streets. Again, I don't think you can apply here because we are a free country and they're not. And that's just the reality. And their people accept that because they see that as a price to pay for order. But in any event, they do have very interesting ideas in the East about America and about the problems with America, and their perspectives are very fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna definitely look into that. Well, I'm hopeful that a Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Elon Musk, like this Justice League group of intelligent, capable people can further surround themselves with more capable people and actually go make a dent in improving America. But
I think
only if they get elected.
Capable is that they're sincere. What those people have in common, aside from the fact that, yes, they're high intellect, they're creative thinkers, they can come up with probably solutions that you wouldn't find in the normal, Washington board meeting. But they really actually want to fix the country. Like, they really actually want to advocate for people's best interest, which is totally new, which would be injecting something totally foreign into Washington. In Washington, I don't know how much time you ever spend out there, but it's like a bubble. It's totally like a bubble. And they almost see themselves as a distinct entity, and I think that that's true when you observe the way bureaucrats act. It's like they see themselves as having an interest, and then the American people have a second interest, and it's different and distinct. And so I think Washington is in its own kind of self-preservation behavior, and it doesn't always align with yours and my interest. In fact, it often doesn't. It's often at actually our expense. And the thing that is missing in this thinking in Washington is that it is only because of our consent and our funding and our agreement that you exist. Where else does the money come from if not from outside of Washington? It's all from outside of Washington funneling into Washington, and then they think that they can do what they want and not be accountable. I mean, it's obviously perverted and wrong, but that is how they think. And somebody like Tulsi, RFK, Trump, Elon, what do they all have in common is that they actually advocate for the country's interests, not Washington's interest, the country's interest. And that would be something that I think just alone is going to create this huge cataclysmic shift in the way things are done.
Yeah. Well, we started off talking about these ideological shifts, and I think that is coming. And hopefully it's here sooner rather than later. But yeah, I often look at Washington, D.C. as a parasite that has latched on to the American people as the host, but the host doesn't realize, we can throw them off. We can just, based on our vote, how we spend our money, voting with your dollar is almost more important than voting with your vote.
Yes.
Look at how you could destroy ABC News by saying, I'm not watching them anymore, and they start scrambling. Oh, crap. I guess we got to be honest moderators going forward. Or Disney. Oh, my gosh, we have one more transgender person in here. I'm not watching your movies anymore. And now the 17th movie in a row tanks, and they go, maybe we should just go back to traditional family movies, which is what made us $100 billion empire. Voting with your dollar is more important than voting with your vote, but both are important. But I think it just bears
100%. Well, that's something that conservatives will kind of realize, I think, over the last few years, is that they may be marginalized in politics. Certainly working people are very marginalized in politics, but they have another lever of power, which is their economic power. And when organized and marshaled effectively, that's a real vote. Like we saw with, I feel like it's a cultural vote. Like we saw with Bud Light, like they did something that was culturally unacceptable. And the American people told them, okay, no, you have crossed a Rubicon culturally that we will not accept. And we are just going to never forgive you. And stop doing that. And it's created like a second vote, or at least made people realize that it can be a second vote. And they do get a few different avenues to express themselves and a few different avenues to exert control over their society, which they are owed.
Yeah. Well, we see it with Bud Light. That was a great example. We see that with Disney. We see that most recently with HarleyDavidson going, oh, wait a minute, they're on to us. We're pushing all this DEI anti-white bullcrap down people's throats. If we want to sell any motorcycles next year, maybe we better clean this up. Many companies are realizing, oh, wait a minute, I've kind of bought into this DEI propaganda, and now it's taken control of us. We have to take back that control. And yet at the same time, so many of these people are at the whim of Wall Street. Like Target was a good example. They're pushing all this like Satan, LGBTQ, 2SA, transgender clothing and mannequins and advertisements. And the conservatives go, you know what? We're not going to shop there anymore. And all of a sudden sales plummet. And they go, oh, these conservatives are just really terrible human beings. But again, it was the power of voting with your dollar that made that change. And then they came out and said, although we support the LGBTQ 2SA plus community, we're going to just have regular boy and girl clothes. Thank you very much. And the conservative money comes back in, right? So anyone watching this program should just know that you have more influence than you think, but you have to have the courage to vote with your dollar.
Well, here's the thing about that stuff is with these companies is the people who run these companies have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. So even if they're the most woke, insane psycho in the world, if they are running a place like Target, they cannot continue doing something that is costing the company money. They can't do it. So if conservatives see something that they want to raise attention to, that they don't like the culture, they don't like the values, or they don't like the thing that's going on at a company, and they just say, if you keep doing this, we are not going to spend money with you anymore, and we otherwise would have. The leadership of the company is essentially obligated. They cannot keep up for much longer to ignore that. They must listen to their customers. It's kind of the law.
Yeah. No, well, again, I think people can vote with their dollars. Like we went to Disneyland in the last little bit, but we've boycotted some of their movies, right?
Right.
And so like they felt it in the movie theater and like, oh, wait, maybe we better make different content. But I didn't see the transgender stuff at Disneyland. And so we went and had a nice vacation there. So anyway, it's just, I think people forget that they can have a massive influence on some of these. Like maybe your voice is small, but if you get enough of those people voting with their dollars, now a major company like Lowe's will either say, okay, we've got to change things, or their CEO comes out and says, if you don't like our anti-white DEI, then go shop at Home Depot. And every conservative goes, hey, thanks for the permission to go spend our money at Home Depot.
They cannot do that. They cannot do that. Like, that's the thing, is these companies have boards. You cannot do that. No, I mean, the best that they could do is kind of say nothing and hope that it passes. But even that, I mean, it's not really working anymore. It's just not working anymore. The reputational damage is so deep and so long that these companies, like, they have to address it. They're realizing, I think, that they just have to address it. Otherwise, it's going to cost them everything.
Yeah.
And is it really worth it? You're going to die on the hill for white rage or whatever. Come on.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Emma Jo, if people want to follow you online, what link can I use? Where can I push some traffic?
Thank you. Please send everybody to Breitbart. Breitbart is absolutely brilliant. I'm the editor there, and we're just doing the best coverage, I think, right now for the election. Obviously, I'm on Twitter. If you want my hot takes, you can find me there too at Emma Jo NYC. And I hope people will keep up with me. I love hearing from listeners and readers.
Okay, I will put those 2 direct links down below. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, you too.